The 8:15 Howrah local was more than just a train to Madhumita. It carried her anxieties, dreams, and the weight of her daily routine. Every morning she would board the crowded compartment. The air, thick with humidity and the scent of turmeric and sweat, clung to her. Amidst the chaos, she found solace in a constant. Her eyes would land on him, always seated by the window. The familiar sight of the man with the book was a silent reassurance. He was a fixed point in her ever-changing world. He was a man seemingly in his late 40s, his hair streaked with gray, a pair of reading glasses perched low on his nose. His face, etched with the lines of time and experience, held a certain gravitas that drew her in. He always wore simple, collared shirts, often in muted shades of blue or gray, which somehow seemed to amplify the air of quiet dignity that surrounded him. He was always engrossed in a book, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving slightly as if silently mouthing the words. Madhumita found herself wondering what worlds he escaped to within those pages. Was he lost in a thrilling mystery, a tender love story, or perhaps a historical account of a bygone era? The book, whatever it held, seemed to be his shield, his sanctuary from the chaos of the train. She never saw him speak to anyone, nor did anyone approach him. He seemed content in his solitude, his presence a quiet melody in the discordant symphony of the train compartment. Madhumita, despite her own introverted nature, found herself oddly fascinated by this man and his unspoken story. There was an inexplicable sense of security that washed over Madhumita whenever she saw him. It was as if his presence, his silent existence, anchored her to something solid in the midst of her own chaotic life. She realized that it was absurd, finding solace in a stranger, a man who was oblivious to her very existence. Yet she couldn't deny the feeling of comfort that settled over her. It was the reassurance of routine, the knowledge that some things like the sunrise and the rhythm of the tides remained constant. In a city that never slept, where change was the only constant, he represented a strange sort of stability. He was a familiar landmark in the ever-shifting landscape of her daily commute. She never felt the need to talk to him to break the silent pact they had. Their connection, if it could be called that, existed solely in the shared space of the train compartment, in the unspoken acknowledgement of their daily ritual, and in that silence Madhumita found a peculiar sense of peace. Unspoken boundaries. The thought of approaching him, of breaking the silent spell they had woven around themselves, never crossed Madhumita's mind. It was as if an invisible barrier existed between them, a barrier built not of words, but of mutual understanding. They were two solitary souls, finding solace in their shared silence, their paths converging for a brief moment in time. She knew nothing about him, his name, his life beyond the train, and she preferred it that way. To give him a voice, to put a face to the stories she had woven in her head, would shatter the illusion, the comfort she found in his presence. Their unspoken connection thrived in the realm of anonymity. Sometimes, when their eyes met for a fleeting second, she would feel a flicker of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. But it was always brief, their gazes quickly returning to their respective sanctuaries, him to his book, and her to the comforting familiarity of his presence. A secret, shared only with silence. The urge to confide in her friends, to share the peculiar comfort she found in the man on the train, would sometimes rise within Madhumita. She would imagine their curious faces, their probing questions, their attempts to analyze and dissect something she herself couldn't quite comprehend. But she would always stop herself, the words remaining trapped in her throat. How could she explain the unexplainable, the solace she found in a stranger's silence? How could she articulate the feeling of security that washed over her whenever she saw him, the man who remained blissfully unaware of the impact he had on her life? No, some secrets were meant to be kept. Some stories were meant to be told only in the silence of one's own heart. And so, the man on the train remained her silent confidant, the keeper of her unspoken emotions, their bond forged in the shared space of the 8:15 Howrah local. The journey continues. Today, as Madhumita stepped onto the crowded train, her eyes instinctively searched for him. And there he was, in his usual spot by the window, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun, his head bent over his book. A wave of relief washed over her, as familiar and comforting as the scent of old books. The train lurched forward, its horn blaring, signaling the start of their shared journey. The cacophony of the city, the jostling crowd, the stifling heat, none of it seemed to matter in that moment. For Madhumita, the world had shrunk to the size of the train compartment, her universe defined by the presence of a silent stranger and the unspoken connection they shared. As the train sped towards Howrah, she allowed herself to be lulled by the rhythm of the tracks, her gaze fixed on the man by the window, a quiet sense of peace settling over her.